"Excuse me, sir. We need you to move right now." The voice cut through the early afternoon air at Gate Bravo 12 of Phoenix Airport like a cold blade, just as Jordan Miles leaned back into seat 1. A fastened his seatbelt and exhaled after 3 exhausting days of negotiations. Brooke Evans, the chief flight attendant, 33 years old, stood as straight as a ruler, her smile smooth and polished, but her eyes were not. They swept over his faded grey sweater, the worn sneakers, the overstuffed backpack filled with a laptop and documents, and in half a second, her mind made its judgment, not the kind of man who belongs in first class. A breath away, Blake Harrington. 46 entered the cabin as though it was built for him. Fitted Armani suit, gleaming watch, and the expensive cologne of a man accustomed to being given the right of way. Jordan looked up. His face didn't flinch, but a quiet shadow crossed his eyes. "I booked this seat," he said, raising his phone. The QR code glowed clearly on the screen. Flight CA 118, Phoenix to San Diego. Seat 1A confirmed 3 weeks ago. Brooke's smile didn't fall, it only thinned. "Our system just reshuffled the priority list, sir. A VIP passenger requires seat 1A. We'll upgrade you to business class and refund 50%. The word priority rolled off her tongue like a polished marble, smooth, gleaming, and leaving no trace. The tempo slowed. Jordan could hear his heartbeat, steady and calm. Not from fear, but fatigue. 3 days, trapped in a windowless boardroom, bitter coffee words sharp as blades. He had wished for 10 minutes of rest, just 10. But here it was again, the familiar theater beginning. The scanning eyes, the measuring tone. The rules bent for metal cards. "Can you gather your belongings?" Brooke tilted her head slightly, her hand gesturing toward the aisle. She was sure it would go as smoothly as the hundreds of times before. A nod, a sigh, a man standing up. Order restored. "No, Jordan," said his voice, low and final, like a door closing. He didn't move. The current shifted. A businessman in 2B looked up, frowning. A silver-haired woman in 4A clicked her tongue. At the back, another attendant exchanged a silent question with her eyes. Blake stepped forward half a pace, his polished shoes tapping the floor softly. "My friend," he said with a confident smile, "the kind that belongs to winners, don't make this difficult. I fly this route 250 times a year. Diamond tier for years. The airline knows who I am." The words fell into the cabin like a coin, into a well rippling outward, demanding to be the center of gravity. Brooke caught his rhythm instantly. "Of course, Mr. Harrington, we deeply appreciate your loyalty." Then she turned back to Jordan, and the warmth in her tone vanished without a trace. "Sir, due to operational needs, we reserve the right to reassign seats." Jordan looked at them, calm enough to unsettle. Once in another city, a manager had told him the exact same phrase, in the same practiced tone, only the setting had changed due to operational needs. Back then he had yielded, swallowing the bitterness quietly. Not this time. This time, he let it dissolve slowly, just to know what it truly tasted like. "We're talking about the seat I paid for." He said each word, placed firmly like stakes in the ground, "and I am sitting exactly where I belong." The story paused, drawing close to each face. Brooke, her mind running through checklists and performance metrics, every minute of delay, another demerit. She hated disorder, but hated uncooperative passengers even more. Blake's chest puffed with the certainty of privilege, raised on the belief that money and miles could bend the rules. He couldn't fathom why a grey sweater dared to challenge that equation. And Jordan, sitting upright, hands resting on his thighs, Back pressed against the seat beneath the calm was a taut string stretched by years of being quietly sidelined in polished boardrooms where decisions glided like ice. Brooke shifted strategy, her smile tightening into a line. "If you continue to refuse, sir, we'll have to call security and report non-compliance with crew instructions. That will affect your record across our system." The word record came out like a hook, small but sharp. The first-class cabin suddenly felt longer, heavier. No one touched yet. Pressure filled the air, pressing down on Jordan's shoulders into his chest, whispering in the back of his mind, "We have connections to catch. Hurry up, why make a scene over one seat?" Order was just one step away, one pull of a suitcase from the overhead bin, and everyone would exhale in relief. The kind of order you buy with a small piece of your dignity. Jordan blinked once, slowly. He unlocked his phone, swiped to messages, and typed only 3 words: "Lauren, stand by." Sent. No reply yet. He didn't need one. He only needed to know that on the other end, someone was already standing by. My friend Blake lowered his voice, leaning closer, his cologne brushing the air. "Be reasonable. Take the upgrade. Make it easy. We all have things to do." His smile opened wide, pretending warmth, but behind it stood a locked gate. The world of those who believe everything moves around them. Jordan turned, met his eyes, and said quietly, "I have been reasonable, and I am exactly where I belong." The smallest sounds grew the loudest, the faint chime of a metal buckle, the soft rustle of a newspaper, the tight breath someone held in. In seat 3. See, a young man placed his phone on his knee, camera tilted toward the aisle, hesitation flickering in his eyes. In seat 6. A brown-skinned woman froze mid-page on her e-book, lips pressed together. People not involved, but now perhaps part of a choice. Brooke raised her radio. One press would start the protocol ground staff security incident report. She felt her heartbeat sync with the digital clock above 2:14, 2:17, 2:20. Each minute of delay, another line in her report. "Sir, this is the final time. Please move to your reassigned seat." Jordan leaned back, gaze, steady voice, no louder than before. "No." The rhythm quickened. Blake scoffed. "Oh, come on." Someone whispered, "God." At the front curtain, a shadow moved, a glimpse of eyes peering in from the galley. The cabin shrank into a small stage, every spotlight fixed on one man in a grey sweater, who decided to stay seated. And then, as with every storm before it breaks, silence arrived. Inside it, everyone heard their own reflection. Brooke heard her KPI clock ticking, her supervisor's voice, asking why the delay, and her own whisper, pleading, "Don't lose control." Blake heard the footsteps of his past. The lounge doors swinging open, the sound of wine being poured, seat 1. Always waiting. This refusal felt like a crack across the glass of his world. Jordan heard something else, his father's voice, long ago. "You don't need to raise your voice to stand firm. You just need to stand firm." So he did. He sat. Simply. Like an anchor dropped in still water. Brooke lowered the radio halfway, looking at him one last time, searching for softness, an apology, a way to exit this scene with everyone's pride intact. None came. Only those dark, steady eyes, calm to the point of defiance. She swallowed hard and pressed the button. The static of the internal channel sparked like the first flicker of a flame. The cabin swayed slightly. Someone shifted a suitcase, slid in the overhead bin. Flight CA. 118 still stood motionless in Phoenix, while time stretched forward without it. People think a seat is just a place to sit, but sometimes it's a line. On one side lies convenience, on the other, dignity. Jordan said nothing more. He turned his phone face down on his thigh, resting his hand over it, as if guarding a small secret. Outside the window, sunlight slid across the airplane's white surface, painting a thin, golden line. Inside, every gaze locked on seat 1A, where a single decision had just fixed the course of the entire cabin. Soon there would be footsteps, firm and heavy. There would be words sharp as nails. There would be people eager to end this scene by dragging someone out of frame. But here right now there was a rare silence. The silence of a man who refused to just give in, who refused to make it easy, who refused to say we'll deal with it later. That silence somehow carried farther than any sound. And at the end of the cabin, the door was about to open. The cabin door opened with a dry snap. 2 security officers stepped in their shoes, thudding against the thick carpet with a low, warning rhythm. First class collectively held its breath. A few passengers leaned into the aisle trying to see what was happening. Others pretended to read their newspapers, but their eyes never left the man seated in 1A Jordan Miles. Thomas Greer appeared right behind them. He was 50 solidly built, his dark blue suit catching the light with every movement. The way he walked said he was not used to being refused. Radio in hand, he wore the training perfect smile, courteous, yet cold. Brooke Evans exhaled in relief, certain this would be over soon. "What's the situation?" Brooke Thomas asked, short and urgent. So this passenger, she hesitated, then continued, has refused to comply with a priority reassignment. Thomas didn't look at her, just scanned the cabin. His gaze slid past Blake. Harrington caught a smug nod, then settled on Jordan. Shoes, jeans, sweater phone on his thigh. He looked, then gave a small nod, as if finishing a report whose outcome he already knew. Sir Thomas said, "You're delaying the boarding process. If you do not cooperate, we will have to ask security to escort you off the aircraft." His voice was even, each word dropping into the air like a stone. Jordan looked up. "On what grounds?" "We have the right to reassign seats due to operational needs. You were offered an upgrade and a refund. That is the airline's goodwill." Jordan answered slowly and clearly, "I don't need goodwill. I need fairness." Behind him, Blake let out a thin, knife-edged laugh. "Come on, man. Don't make a show of this. You're slowing everyone down over a seat." Jordan turned, meeting Blake's eyes. "A seat doesn't matter, right?" he said quietly, but loud enough for the forward rows to hear. "Unless it's the seat someone tells you you don't deserve." A beat of silence fell. Even Brooke faltered, her fingers tightening around the radio. Thomas did not care for silence. He stepped closer, leaning on the authority of his title. "I will say this once more, Mr. Miles. If you don't cooperate, you will be removed from this aircraft and cited for a violation that will affect your passenger record across our system." Jordan checked his watch. 2:18 in the afternoon. He unlocked his phone and typed quickly. "To Lauren Park, subject CA118. Review all contract terms with Constellation Air, especially the cooperation breach section and the ethical responsibility clause. Prepare a direct line to the CEO, Richard Coleman." He sent it, then looked up, his tone still level. "I'm staying in this seat." Thomas blew out a sharp breath and turned to Brooke. "Call security." Just then, a low, gravelly voice rose from 3C. "Hold on." Everyone turned. Andre Whittaker, in a checked shirt and a sharply cut face, held up his phone. "I'm recording all of this." Brooke's eyes widened. "So filming is not permitted in the cabin." Andre didn't lower his phone. "I'm a paying passenger. I have the right to document what happens when someone is being treated unfairly." Thomas swung toward him, his voice rising a notch. "You are obstructing staff in the performance of their duties." "What duties exactly?" Andre shot back, eyes steady. "Forcibly removing a person from the seat he legally holds. Then say the valid reason out loud, so everyone can hear it." A ripple of murmurs spread down the cabin. A middle-aged woman in 4A spoke up. "He bought the ticket, didn't he? Why kick him out?" Thomas clenched his jaw. "This is not your concern." "Oh, it is all of ours now," Andre said, slow and clear. The words flipped a switch. More phones rose quietly. Screens lit like a string of beacons. The cool blue of camera light washed over Thomas's face as if he were being examined by his own actions. Sir Jordan said, voice soft but weighted, "You're attempting to remove a calm passenger with a valid ticket. Everything you do now will be documented." Thomas pulled out his phone. "Call operations," he murmured to Brooke. "I don't want this scene getting out." But it was already too late. The cabin we fee was live. Andre had gone live. The headline was simple: "Man forced from first-class seat despite valid ticket." Views began to climb. 10, 100, 1,000. Brooke's radio crackled. Gate control asking reason for delay. She answered under her breath. "Passenger issue in progress." No one on board knew that back in Constellation Air's office in Dallas, the internal monitoring system had flagged an unusual delay at Gate Bravo 12. A small invisible line of data had just begun to thread its way into a vast machine. Thomas leaned down toward Jordan, voice a hiss. "Who do you think you are?" Jordan met his eyes. "The man who paid for this seat." For a moment, Thomas froze. Something in that gaze held him, stripped the script from his tongue. Pride yanked him back into character, authority, policy, dominance. "Fine," he said, "you're banned from flying Constellation Air system-wide." A sharp gasp came from somewhere. Brooke's eyes flew wide, but before she could speak, Jordan answered, light as air. "I wasn't planning to fly with you again." The line wasn't loud, but it landed everywhere. A few passengers nodded. Andre kept filming. Somewhere online, a viewer whispered, "He's right." The two security officers approached. The older one, Sergeant Reynolds, checked the ticket and passport, then turned to Thomas. "Everything is valid. He has the right to remain. Without a safety concern, we cannot force a removal." Thomas's jaw bunched. "We have the right to reassign. Not with a confirmed ticket and boarding pass like this." Reynolds cut in. "I won't do that." The air thickened. Brooke looked to Thomas. Blake scowled. For a heartbeat, time stood still, just like the minutes before a storm breaks. "You're costing the airline thousands of dollars," Thomas growled. Jordan leaned in and said softly, "I think a bigger loss is coming." He unlocked his phone and typed, "Lauren, prepare to activate Protocol Delta. Call Richard Coleman directly." The message flew. No one saw the woman on the other end lift her head from her desk, eyes sharp as a blade. On her screen, a line appeared. "Emergency flight, CA-118. Back in the cabin, Andre lowered his phone for a second and looked at Jordan. "Stay calm, I've got all of it." Jordan nodded. "Thank you." Blake suddenly stood and faced the cabin. "This is ridiculous. We're all being held up because one man thinks he's special." A woman's voice rang from row 6. "He is special because he refuses to be silent." The murmurs swelled. Some in support, some in disapproval. The cabin split like a hairline crack across glass. Thomas had lost control. Brooke's hands trembled. Jordan stayed still. Outside the window, the light shifted. The sun slid down the wing in a blazing gold streak. He exhaled long and deep. In his mind, a single line sounded. Sometimes silence is the strongest strike. The cabin door remained open, but no one seemed to hear the world beyond anymore. Every focus had narrowed to the man in 1A, the man they assumed was just another ordinary passenger. One seat, one look, one refusal. The smallest things are sometimes the first tremors of an earthquake. No one knew that this moment of silence would enter the history of Constellation Air. Only Jordan Miles, the man sitting still in seat 1. A light reflecting in eyes, no longer angry, but frighteningly calm. Thomas Greer tightened his radio lips pressed thin. Brooke stood behind him, trying to avoid the lenses of dozens of phones pointed their way. The sense of being surrounded made the cabin air congeal like a pocket of heat about to explode. "Enough," Thomas said, each word squeezed through his teeth. "I will handle this myself." He took out his phone, turned his back to the passengers and dialed operations. "This is Greer Gate Bravo 12. We have a non-compliant passenger requesting support." He did not finish the sentence. His screen flashed. An incoming call overrode the line, the display reading R. Coleman, CEO. Thomas froze. He had heard that name in internal briefings his entire career, but had never received a direct call. He glanced at Brooke. She stared back, lips forming the words, "Answer it." Thomas swallowed and slid to accept. "Yes, hello, Mr. Coleman." The voice on the other end was low, cold, and so clear the entire forward cabin could hear. "Greer, what on earth is happening on my flight CA-118? Thomas went rigid. "Sir, we have a disruptive passenger refusing to." "You are talking about Jordan Miles, correct?" Those 3 words clanged through the cabin like struck metal. Brooke's mouth fell open. Blake Harrington went from confident to paper white. The cabin fell dead quiet, only the muted rumble of engines leaking in from the window. Sir Thomas stammered, "You know that passenger. You are trying to eject the CEO of EtherTech Systems from his legally held seat. Is that correct?" Every head lifted. Andre, the man filming, held his breath and kept the camera steady. The couple in row 4 glanced at each other, and the woman in row 6 whispered, "Oh my God." Thomas locked up the words jamming in his throat, each heartbeat a drum. "I didn't know, sir." "Yes, you didn't know. That will not save you." The call audio filtered perfectly into the live stream, and within minutes, this line would become a subtitle racing across social media. Douglas Know now, Richard Coleman, the CEO of Constellation Air, spoke slowly and precisely, like reading an indictment. EtherTech is our strategic partner. Their aerofuel core and Skyguard systems are operating every aircraft in this fleet. Our entire system relies on the technology they created, and the man you are insulting is the one who designed it. Brooke let the radio slip from her hand. Blake stepped back, as if the floor had given way. Jordan didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't signal. He simply looked quietly. A silence heavier than any words. "Listen carefully, Greer," Richard continued. "This entire exchange is being recorded. I have seen the live video. I am hearing what you said to Mr. Miles. I heard the phrase, 'passengers like you.' Do you know how that sounds?" Thomas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Brooke's fists clenched, trembling. "It sounds like discrimination. It sounds like the arrogance of a system that has forgotten customers are the reason we exist." Richard's voice sharpened like a blade. "I have no use for representatives of this airline who do not understand the word respect. As of right now, you are suspended, effective immediately. Leave the aircraft." Brooke jerked. "Sir, what about me?" "You as well, Evans. You had charge of this crew and allowed this to happen. I do not require an explanation." Brooke choked her voice, cracking. I was following policy, sir. I have 2 children. Then you should have thought of them before deciding someone did not deserve the seat he paid for." The air turned to lead. Security stood frozen, unsure what to do. Blake looked around for cover, but every gaze now held only contempt. Mr. Coleman Thomas pleaded, "Please give me a chance. The chance has passed. Greer." "Mr. Miles does not need to lift a finger. This video already has hundreds of thousands of views. I will not let my airline drown in that storm because of your ego." First class filled with muffled sobs. Brooke covered her face. Thomas bowed his head. Richard paused, then spoke slowly, voice hard as a gavel. "Greer Evans, you are terminated immediately. Security escort them off the aircraft." A wave of noise broke loose. Passengers filmed, some crying, some laughing. Andre kept recording, hands shaking. He knew this moment would be seen by millions. Blake suddenly shoved himself into the scene, his voice climbing with panic. "What about me? I am just a VIP. I have rights, Blake Harrington," Richard said flatly. "Your diamond status is revoked permanently. Legal will investigate your mileage fraud over the past 3 years. Until findings are complete, you are banned from Constellation Air indefinitely." Blake went slack, then shouted, "This is insane. I have the right." "You used to think so. Now you do not." Richard hung up. Only the hollow end tone remained. Brooke and Thomas were escorted out without a word. Blake struggled, then was pulled along. When the cabin door sealed, the space erupted in applause. Not raucous cheering, but firm rolling claps, each beat a declaration that the order was being rewritten. Jordan remained seated. He did not smile. He did not nod. He stared into the space ahead. In his eyes, the warm cabin lights flickered into 2 halos, one of exhaustion, one of resolve. Andre stepped closer, camera still in hand. "Mr. Miles," he said softly, "thank you for not staying silent." Jordan inclined his head. "Thank you for filming." "What are you going to do next?" Andre asked, barely above a whisper. Jordan stood and pulled down his carry-on. What I should have done the moment they spoke the first word. He stepped out of the cabin, footsteps light yet ringing like a clean cut. Beyond, the concourse blazed with gold sunlight. He unlocked his phone and typed quickly, "Lauren, execute Protocol Delta. Terminate all contracts with Constellation Air, effective at midnight tonight." On the other end, the reply arrived almost at once. "Confirmation. EtherTech will send contract termination notice within 60 minutes. Jordan pocketed the phone and walked on without looking back. Behind him, shutters clicked, voices called, and phones buzzed like an oncoming tide. The video was spreading. Views were climbing by the second. He did not turn around. He knew this moment, the moment a dismissed person stood up, no longer belonged to him alone. It now belonged to everyone who had ever been told they did not deserve. A jet slid past the glass, its engines thundering. Jordan looked up. Light flared in his eyes like fire. That afternoon, the Phoenix sky burned bright, and the aviation industry did not yet know that only hours later, a collapse would begin, born from Seat 1A on Flight CA-118. That night, on the 47th floor of EtherTech headquarters in San Diego, the lights were still on. Lauren Park, Vice President of Legal Affairs, stood before a wall of screens, cold blue light washing across her sharp face. On one of them, the words "Protocol Delta Initiated" glowed brightly as streams of data began leaving the central servers. One click and the domino began to fall. At Constellation Air's Operations Center in Dallas, The aero-fuel core system suddenly flashed an error. The green charts turned yellow, then red. The overnight engineers thought it was a software glitch, but when they tried to log in, a message appeared: "Access revoked, contract terminated." "What the hell is this?" one of them shouted. "Is the system locked?" No one answered because they all received the same email from EtherTech under contract clause 14.2. All access and technical support for Constellation Air are terminated, effective 23:59 tonight. Beneath it, a single line of signature: Jordan Miles, CEO, EtherTech Systems. 2 in the morning. Thomas Greer lay on a couch in a rented apartment in Dallas. The television flickered with breaking news. The video from flight CA-118 had spread like wildfire. The headline read, "Black CEO removed from first-class seat 3 hours later, airline paralyzed." Images of Jordan sitting quietly in seat. 1A, eyes unreadable, filled every news segment, talk show, and social feed. Thomas gripped his whiskey glass, his throat closing. He had believed what happened at the airport was just a minor incident. Now the entire world was watching that minor incident become the moral test of an entire industry. In the next room, Brooke Evans couldn't sleep. She was staring at her termination letter, guilt crushing her. Her 2 children had called and asked, "Mum, why are people saying you're bad?" She didn't know how to answer. Meanwhile, in a hotel suite in San Diego, Jordan sat alone by the window, looking down at a sleeping city. His phone buzzed non-stop. Updates from Lauren, 2347, 3 contracts cancelled worth $370 million annually. 0005, aero-fuel core access disabled. 0014, Skyguard safety monitoring system suspended. Each message was a cold heartbeat of power. He didn't reply, only typed one line: "Monitor the situation. No further intervention." Jordan closed his eyes and leaned back. He knew that by morning, the aviation world would wake to chaos. But he had no regrets. That feeling, the quiet that comes after doing what's right, was strange. Not joy, not vengeance, but a cold peace, known only to those who have finally balanced the scales. 5:30 in the morning, JFK Airport, New York. The first Constellation Air flight failed to take off. Fuel system error, unable to calculate load. Then the second flight, the third alarms blared across the system. The operations center activated every backup server, but all were locked out by EtherTech's security wall. By 6:10, over 40 flights were grounded. The FAA intervened, ordering a temporary halt to all operations until safety could be guaranteed. Red lights filled the main control board. The press descended like wolves scenting blood. CNN ran the headline, "Constellation Air Faces Unprecedented Systems Crisis." CNBC followed, "Sources confirm EtherTech, the tech partner, has withdrawn all technical support." Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram exploded with hashtags, "Justice for Jordan," "Cetone Dignity is not negotiable." Constellation Air's stock fell 18% by morning, 28% by noon. Online, millions of comments flooded. In one seat just collapsed an entire system. This isn't revenge, it's a lesson. 9:45 that morning. Constellation Air Headquarters, Dallas. Emergency meeting. CEO Richard Coleman stood before a room full of executives. His tie loosened, his eyes hollow. On the projection screen played the video everyone had seen hundreds of times. Brooke and Thomas confronting Jordan, the arrogance in their eyes, and the fatal phrase, "Passengers like you." "We are being destroyed," Richard rasped by one foolish moment. No one answered. An assistant reported EtherTech is refusing all contact. Lauren Park is not responding. They've erased every access credential. Richard closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He knew Jordan. They had met twice during partnership meetings. A quiet man, punctual, humble, never boastful. Richard had once thought Jordan was easy to persuade. Now he understood the greatest mistake was underestimating the silent. "Prepare a press conference," Richard said. "I'll take responsibility." That afternoon, in Constellation Air's press hall, over 100 reporters packed the room. Richard stepped up, no lapel mic, just a trembling sheet of paper in hand. Behind him, the Constellation logo gleamed like a cruel joke. On behalf of Constellation Air, he began, "I want to extend a public apology to Mr. Jordan Miles, CEO of EtherTech Systems, for the unacceptable treatment he endured on Flight CA-118. The actions of our employees do not represent our company's values. I confirm that Thomas Greer and Brooke Evans have been terminated. We are implementing mandatory unconscious bias training and enacting new anti-discrimination policies." A reporter called out, "Have you spoken to Mr. Miles?" Richard paused, then answered, "I've called him 12 times. He hasn't responded." The room erupted with flashes and camera clicks. Another voice shouted, "Is it true? EtherTech has terminated a $370 million contract." Richard looked down, then up. "Yes." "Any chance of reinstating it? We're attempting to negotiate," he said quietly. But Mr. Miles has not replied. He hesitated, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. And he has every reason not to. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Jordan sat in his quiet office, gazing at the fog-covered skyline. Lauren entered, tablet in hand. They just held the press conference. Coleman apologized, publicly asked to renegotiate. Jordan was silent, fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "Their stock," he asked. "Down 28%. The media's calling it Black Monday for the aviation industry." He nodded, eyes deepening. "Good. They'll remember." Lauren looked at him softly. "Do you want to restore the contract after their apology?" Jordan lifted his gaze, eyes calm as water before a storm, still reflective, unmoved. "No," he said. "We don't rebuild on rotten foundations." Night fell. Over San Diego, other airlines' planes sliced through clouds, their lights stretching into peaceful trails. Jordan stood by the window glass in hand, recalling his father's words. "Sometimes you have to make the world stop so it can finally see what it's been ignoring." He exhaled and smiled faintly. Yes, the world had stopped, and this time it would not forget. 3 days after half of Constellation Air's system collapsed, American media called it the earthquake from Seat 1A. Every television network, every newspaper, every podcast repeated one name, Jordan Miles. The image of him sitting quietly in first class, calm eyes, steady amid a storm of prejudice, became a symbol shared across social media. Yet while the world roared in praise, Jordan chose silence. He avoided cameras, declined interviews, and never posted a single statement. Because to him, this was not a victory. It was a warning. That evening, Lauren walked into his office, holding a stack of reports. "We're in the eye of the storm," she said. "Constellation's stock just fell another 12%. The FAA is investigating everything. And you, Jordan, have been nominated as one of the top 10 most influential people of the year." Jordan looked up from his laptop, his voice steady. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want them to be accountable." Lauren smiled faintly. "Do you know what scares them the most?" What that, for the first time, power didn't come from a loud voice, but from absolute calm. He gazed out the window where the lights of San Diego's airport crossed like the veins of the world. "You know," he said slowly, "they're not afraid of me. They're afraid of what I represent, the truth they pretended not to see." Meanwhile, in Dallas, CEO Richard Coleman walked into his second press conference. He looked 10 years older than he had 4 days before. Behind him hung a new banner that read, "Constellation Air commits to change." But the press was not easily convinced. A reporter asked, "Has Mr. Miles responded since your first conference?" "Not yet. Do you think he's punishing your company?" Richard paused, then answered honestly, "No. I think he's educating us." That sentence went viral instantly. Commentators said, when the head of an airline admits he's being taught a moral lesson, it's no longer a scandal. It's a cultural turning point. The next morning, Lauren walked into Jordan's office with an envelope. "Invitations from 9 other airlines," she said. "They're asking EtherTech to perform independent equity audits. 3 of them are offering double the service fee just to sign new contracts." Jordan stayed quiet. "You're not going to respond?" Lauren asked. He stood, walked toward the window and said softly, "Lauren, I don't want to turn this into commerce. I want to turn it into change. Real change. Yes, not them signing because they fear backlash, but because they understand why they must." Lauren nodded, a trace of admiration in her eyes. "You really are the only person I know who could bring down an airline and still talk like a philosophy professor." Jordan smiled slightly. "Not teaching, just reminding them dignity doesn't need permission." A week later, Jordan's first interview aired on CNN. No spotlight, no grand stage, just a simple white room, soft lighting, and a calm, resonant voice that went straight to the listener's heart. The host asked Mr. Miles, "Do you feel like you got revenge?" Jordan tilted his head. "If I wanted revenge, I would have done it the moment they disrespected me. But I waited. Because I didn't want them to lose, I wanted them to see. See what that prejudice doesn't just hurt others, it destroys the system that harbors it." That line, trimmed into a 30-second clip, spread across social media, within 12 hours reaching over 10 million views. A new hashtag was born, "Let Them See." In another corner of America, Thomas Greer watched the interview in a nearly empty bar. The beer in front of him had gone flat. He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his friends. But what haunted him most was Jordan's calm gaze in the video. No anger, no hatred. That calmness was what he could not forgive himself for. "He didn't need to do anything," Thomas muttered. "He just sat there. And I destroyed myself." Brooke Evans was watching the same clip in a small cafe in Oregon, where she had moved to start over. Tears welled up as she heard Jordan say, "No one deserves humiliation just because they don't fit what others are used to seeing." She turned off the screen and whispered, "I wish I had stood by you sooner." As for Blake Harrington, the man who once believed money could buy anything, he was now under investigation for financial fraud. Every partner withdrew. His company collapsed in 3 days. When reporters cornered him, he only said, "One seat destroyed my life." On Twitter, thousands replied, "No, you destroyed it yourself." In San Diego, the EtherTech headquarters was quiet like a temple. Jordan was reading Lauren's latest report. The FAA just passed a new rule: mandatory anti-discrimination training for all airlines. Constellation is leading the implementation. Jordan wasn't surprised. Good. They're learning. Lauren hesitated. "Will you meet Richard?" He sent an invitation for a private dialogue, not negotiation. just to talk about real change. Jordan looked through the window where the sunset painted everything in molten gold. He nodded. Yes, I'll listen this time. Not to forgive. To see how far they're willing to go. 3 weeks later, the meeting took place in a closed room. No cameras, no reporters. Just 2 men, one who had bowed in apology, and one who had made the world stand still. 4 hours passed. No one knew what was said. Only one line was given to the press afterward, spoken by Richard. Mr. Miles didn't want to destroy us. He wanted to awaken us. And I believe this time we understand. That night, Jordan stood alone on the balcony of EtherTech Tower. The San Diego sky was clear, streaked with planes drawing silver lines across the dark. He thought of his father's words. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to say what's right and stand still, long enough for the world to quiet down. Jordan smiled faintly. He had done exactly that. Not with power, not with revenge, but with resolve, with faith that justice doesn't need to scream to be heard. Beneath that sky, where new flights once again cut through the clouds, the world had changed, all because of one man, one seat, and one refusal to move. And from that night on, no one called him the victim of Flight CA-118 anymore. They called him by another name, the man who made the sky stop. 3 weeks had passed since what the press called Black Monday. The skies had returned to their rhythm. Flights once again lifted from the runway's engines, roaring into the dawn. But deep within the American aviation industry, nothing was the same. On the top floor of EtherTech headquarters, Jordan Miles stood before the vast glass wall, looking down at San Diego, bathed in early sunlight. The reflection on the glass cut across his face, tracing lines of both resolve and fatigue. In his hand, a cup of cold coffee. Outside, a Constellation airplane rose into the sky, bearing a new logo, soft blue instead of a red, and a new slogan, "Every passenger matters," a promise born from collapse. Lauren Park entered quietly, her steps as light as the morning breeze. "You're up early." Jordan turned and gave a rare small smile. Couldn't sleep. Some storms leave echoes that never stop. She placed a folder on the desk. "This is the report from the FAA and Department of Transportation meeting. Constellation has approved every reform you proposed. They're establishing the Committee for Equality and Fair Environment, with EtherTech serving as independent oversight." Jordan skimmed through and nodded, and the meeting with Richard Coleman Lauren spoke slowly. "He's changed, truly." I saw remorse in his eyes, not fear of losing a contract, fear of losing his soul. Jordan was silent, a flicker of contemplation in his gaze. "We'll monitor quarterly. If they slip back into old habits, I won't hesitate to end it." Lauren studied him, realizing in that moment the enormous weight he carried. From a man humiliated in first class, he had become a symbol for millions who suffered in silence. But power often came hand in hand with solitude. "You know," she said softly, "people think you were born to lead, but I think you were born to awaken." Jordan smiled faintly. "Awakening is the world's job, Lauren. I just knock on the door." At the same time in Dallas, Richard Coleman was filming a new campaign for the airline. No power suits, no hollow marketing lines. He sat before the camera and spoke with a quiet, steady voice. "We once believed good service meant providing comfort. But what people truly need isn't comfort, it's respect. That day, we hurt one man. In return, he showed us the value of dignity, something you can't buy, can't beg for, only live worthy of." The video aired during prime time. No music, no effects. just an honest apology and an earnest gaze. Across America, people watched in silence. In a small cafe in Portland, Brooke Evans watched with tears streaming down her hand. She had changed her name, started over now, working for a non-profit supporting single mothers. When she heard Richard speak of dignity, she whispered to herself, "Yes, I lost mine when I thought following procedure made me innocent." She typed a message to Jordan, unsure if he'd ever read it. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know that because of you, I've taught my daughter that no one is too small to do what's right." The message went unanswered, but for her that silence was enough. At an aviation conference in New York, Andre Whitaker, the man who filmed history, was invited to speak. He recounted the moment. His hands trembled as he lifted the phone, but he pressed record anyway. "I didn't know I was capturing history. I just thought if I didn't, no one would believe it happened." The room erupted in applause. Andre smiled, eyes glinting with conviction. "We live in an age where one tap can topple an empire or save a soul. Let's choose to use it for what's right." That night, Lauren sent Jordan a link. He opened it, an article from The Atlantic titled, "When Justice is Silent: The Story of Jordan Miles." The opening line read, "He didn't chant, slogans didn't retaliate, didn't demand anyone kneel. He simply sat still and let the system collapse under the weight of its own wrong." Jordan read it quietly for a long time. Then he opened LinkedIn, where millions waited for each word he wrote. He typed slowly, as if writing to himself, "I don't want praise. I just want a world where no one has to fight to be treated like a human being. Justice doesn't need noise. Sometimes it only needs one person who refuses to stand when told to leave." Within 2 hours, the post had over 3 million shares. No arguments, no debates. Just a calm wave of comments. "I've been through that. Thank you for not staying silent. I'll remember dignity is not negotiable." That same night at Los Angeles airport, a young black girl about 12 boarded a Constellation Air flight with her mother. A new flight attendant knelt slightly and smiled. "Welcome aboard, both of you. Let me know if you need anything." The girl looked surprised, turned to her mother and whispered, "Mum, why are they so nice?" Her mother smiled gently. "Because one man taught them how to see." A month later, Richard Coleman visited EtherTech headquarters. No press, no contracts, just a private meeting between 2 men. Richard entered slowly, and Jordan met him with a firm handshake. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Richard said, "I didn't come to ask for the contract back. I came to ask, how do I make sure I never become that man in the video again?" Jordan looked at him for a long moment. "Start by listening. Not to reply, but to understand. And after that, then teach others to do the same." Richard nodded. "We're doing that, and I'll keep doing it until respect no longer needs to be taught." Jordan's gaze softened. "If you keep that promise, then your failure that day won't be meaningless." That night, after Richard left, Jordan stepped onto the balcony. The ocean breeze brushed through his hair. Below the city glowed streets, weaving together like the circuitry of humanity, tangled, flawed, yet still functioning. He recalled every moment, the scornful eyes, the mocking laughter, the threats and the applause that followed, all of it forming one long chain from humiliation to awakening. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it only needs someone steady enough to stay silent at the right moment." In the distance, a plane took off, leaving a streak of light cutting across the night sky. Jordan watched it rise, a small smile curling on his lips. A smile not of triumph, but of peace, because he knew from that day on every flight that left the ground carried a lesson about respect, about dignity, and about the man who once sat quietly in seat 1A and made the entire world learn to see itself again. The morning in San Diego wore a soft gray mist. The Ethertech office was quiet, filled only with the faint tapping of keyboards and the rhythmic drip of a coffee machine. Jordan Miles sat inside a glass-walled meeting room, a presentation glowing on the screen before him. But his mind was elsewhere, drifting back to a single moment, the moment he heard Brooke Evans say the words, "Passengers like you." A sentence so small, yet powerful enough to burst open the door of prejudice he had spent a lifetime trying to keep closed. Lauren Park entered, holding a thin folder. "Today's the day they sign officially," she said. "Constellation will become the first airline with an independent equality supervisor, appointed by Ethertech." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "And they agreed to include the ethics clause in the contract," Lauren smiled. "All of it. They even asked permission to use the CA-118 incident as part of their internal training program. Coleman signed it himself." Jordan leaned back, gazing toward the window. Outside, the sky looked like a sheet of silver glass reflecting the morning sun. "It's strange," he said sometimes. "What forces a system to change isn't policy, but a strike to its conscience." Lauren looked at him with a hint of tenderness. "You still think about that day a lot, don't you?" Jordan nodded softly. "You know, I can't forget that moment of silence, when I said no for the last time, and everything just stopped. I realized then there are small refusals strong enough to shift the axis of the world." She smiled. "People call that courage." He shook his head. "No, I call it exhaustion. When people are tired of bowing, that's when they finally stand straight." That same day, at Constellation's headquarters in Dallas, Richard Coleman walked into the boardroom, the same room where he had once commanded, judged and signed billion-dollar deals. Now a small plaque hung on the wall, Board of Integrity. Around the table sat new directors, younger, more diverse, many women, many people of color. Richard began in a calm voice. 3 months ago, we lost nearly 1/3 of this company's value because of what we thought was a small mistake. But it wasn't an incident. It was the result of how we treated people for years. He paused, looking straight into the camera recording the online session. "We won't run from this lesson. We'll turn it into our compass." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then applause broke out, unified, sincere. Richard inhaled deeply, feeling light for the first time in months. In his mind, he could still see Jordan Miles, the man who didn't shout, didn't fight for dominance, but simply sat still, forcing an entire system to face itself in the mirror. That afternoon, Jordan received a call. Richard's voice came through the speaker, calm but heavy. "I just wanted to say thank you, Miles. Without you, I'd never have realized I was steering a blind ship." Jordan said nothing, listening to the faint wind on the other end. Richard continued, "I'm not apologizing for the lost contract money comes back eventually. I'm apologizing for forcing you to use power to teach us humanity." "You don't have to say it," Jordan interrupted gently. "What matters is that you understand." "I do," Richard exhaled. "And I promise from now on, every new employee at Constellation will learn the lesson of Seat 1A before they learn to serve." Jordan smiled softly. "If you do that, then that day wasn't in vain." Evening fell. Jordan's office glowed with the single light from his desk lamp. He opened his laptop and read through emails, messages of gratitude stories from strangers. A student who was denied a job interview because of her appearance. She stood up, sued, and won. An employee discriminated against for his background. He wrote about it, and his story went viral. A father wrote, "My son watched your video. He says he wants to become an engineer so he can build fairer systems." Jordan read every word, then stopped at an email from Brooke Evans. The subject line read, "I met someone who needed your thank you." The message was short. "I'm working with an organization supporting single mothers. Yesterday, I met a woman fired for speaking out against discrimination. She quoted you, 'Dignity is not negotiable.' She said, because of that, she wasn't ashamed to stand up." Jordan finished reading and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Outside, the city lights shimmered like an ocean of stars. Maybe this was the real victory, not rising stocks or public praise, but when one person's story became the strength for thousands of others. The next day, EtherTech held an internal gathering. Employees filled the main atrium, the air respectful, yet warm. Jordan stepped onto the stage, carrying no script, only a small folded note. He spoke slowly. "We live in a time where almost everything can be bought, but one thing remains priceless: how we make others feel when we hold power. Real power doesn't make people fear you. It makes them believe in you. And real justice isn't punishment. It's renewal. When a system fails, we don't just destroy it. We make it learn to be better." The room was silent. Then someone began clapping. Then another. The applause spread like a wave, heavy yet gentle, just like the story they were all a part of. Afterward, Lauren caught up with Jordan in the hallway, sunlight stretching gold across the floor. "You know," she said, "when I first joined this company, I thought I was working for a tech genius. Now I know I'm working for someone who believes in people." Jordan smiled. "I just learned from being underestimated. It taught me to see value where others overlook it." Lauren asked quietly, "Do you think the world has really changed?" He looked up at the sky, where a constellation plane glinted above its metallic body, shining like an apology. "Not yet," he said, "but at least it's starting to learn." That night, Jordan wrote a short post on LinkedIn, words that would later be reprinted in countless leadership books. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong where you've worked to be. Don't stay silent when injustice becomes normal. One word, one look, one right action can start a revolution." I just sat still in seat 1A, but the world stood up. Within 24 hours, the post reached 10 million views and hundreds of thousands of comments worldwide. People no longer talked about color contracts or money, they talked about dignity. Outside the window, the San Diego night was crystal clear. Jordan stepped onto his balcony, the ocean breeze carrying the salt of the Pacific. He looked up at the sky where planes traced glowing lines through the dark. He knew somewhere among them, someone was being treated more fairly because he once said no. And in his quiet smile, the sky seemed to shine a little brighter, not from the lights, but because humanity had finally begun to see one another in the light. 2 months after the incident with Seat 1A, the world still hadn't stopped talking about Jordan Miles. His name appeared in news programs and leadership courses, even in corporate ethics lectures at Harvard. But while everyone saw him as a hero of justice, Jordan chose to disappear. He left San Diego in silence. No press conferences, no interviews, Lauren received only one short message. I need time. Keep the work going. Don't look for me. One early morning, Jordan arrived in a small town in Arizona, where the desert stretched to the horizon, and the sky was so clear it seemed carved by hand. He rented a small wooden cabin beside the dunes and lived simply no social media, no news, no recognition. On the first day, he just stood and looked at the sky. No engines, no metal, no aircraft noise. Only the wind. He smiled softly. Maybe now he was truly free. That night, Jordan built a small fire outside his cabin. The flames flickered against the dark, casting shadows across his face, a face that carried the traces of years that had never truly rested. He remembered it all the moment he stood his ground in Seat 1. A Brooks' eyes, Richard's trembling apology, Lauren's call, and the collapse that followed like a tidal wave. No one ever knew what he truly felt then. Not triumph, not revenge, only emptiness. Because he understood justice doesn't give you satisfaction, it gives you responsibility. The responsibility to live in a way that honors that moment. One afternoon, while wandering through a local market, Jordan heard the radio playing inside an old grocery store. The airline Constellation Air has announced a $50 million fund called Wings of Equity, dedicated to eliminating inequality in aviation and technology. CEO Richard Coleman stated, "We cannot change the past, but we can change how the world takes flight from here." Jordan smiled faintly. He hadn't spoken to Richard since their last meeting, but now he knew that a man had truly understood. He paid for a can of soda, stepped out into the sunlight, and looked up at the endless sky. A plane soared overhead, a streak of white carving across the blue, breathtaking in its beauty. He whispered, "Good, they've started flying the right way." That evening, Lauren called. It took her a few seconds before she heard his voice on the other end. "Where are you?" Jordan answered gently. "Somewhere quieter than the sky." "That sounds philosophical," she said, half laughing. "I called to share good news. The Aviation Equity Commission wants to appoint you as an honorary advisor. And there are rumors the president wants to award you the Civilian Medal." Jordan chuckled softly, the sound carried away by the wind. "I don't need medals, Lauren. I just need the world to remember that lesson longer than the lifespan of a headline." Lauren's voice softened. "And will you come back? EtherTech is preparing a new project, Skylink, a humanitarian tracking system for relief aircraft. They need you." Jordan stayed silent for a long moment, then spoke in a voice as calm as the desert breeze. "I'll come back. But not for recognition. I'll come back to continue." 3 weeks later, Jordan returned to San Diego. EtherTech welcomed him, not with ceremonies, but with a hallway lined with posters, each one bearing his words, "Dignity is not negotiable." Below every poster was a handwritten note and a signature. "Thank you for teaching us how to see each other." He walked slowly through the hallway, his throat tightening. Lauren met him at his office door. "Welcome back, Mr. Miles." He smiled, eyes soft. "Thank you, Ms. Park. Still the one keeping me grounded." She smiled back. "And you're the reason we dare to fly." On the day of the signing with the FAA, the press crowded the hall. Richard Coleman stood beside Jordan on stage, his face bright yet humble. He spoke before hundreds of reporters. "Today we sign not just to manage the skies, but to preserve humanity in every flight. And let me be clear, the man standing beside me is not an adversary. He is the one who saved us from ourselves." Jordan shook his hand, his smile gentle but firm. He didn't make a speech, only said one quiet line: "Justice doesn't need noise. It only needs those who are willing to listen." The room erupted in applause. Someone in the audience began to cry. That night, Jordan drove to San Diego Airport. He didn't fly, he just wanted to watch the planes take off. One after another, they lifted from the runway, streaks of light cutting across the night sky. In each glowing trail, he saw his own journey, a man who had once been told he didn't belong now, watching the whole world belong to what he believed in. Near the fence, a little boy sat beside his father, pointing to the sky. "Dad, is it true that because of that man, everyone gets treated better now?" The father nodded. "Yes. He's not a pilot, but he changed the way the world flies." Jordan heard it, lowered his head, and smiled quietly. Back home, he opened his laptop and began writing the closing lines of his upcoming speech for the Global Leadership Summit, the theme, Power and Humanity. "I once thought justice was victory, but then I learned real justice is awakening, when those who were wrong recognize the value of what is right and choose to change themselves. I don't want to be remembered as a symbol. I want to be proof that even one small word, one silent act can shake an entire system." He paused, then typed the final line short, but holding the soul of his journey. Don't wait for power to do what's right. Do what's right, and redefine what power means. He pressed save. The screen dimmed, reflecting his face, peaceful, wiser, serene. Outside, a plane glided across the city, its silver contrail like a signature across the sky. Jordan looked up, his eyes following it. And in that light, the man once forced from seat one smiled. He no longer needed to fly to touch the sky, because now the sky itself had learned to bow before the dignity of humankind. 6 months after the incident, summer returned to San Diego. The sky was high and clear, just like the day Jordan first boarded that fateful flight, but this time the world was different. At the International Convention Center, he had been invited to speak at the Global Forum on Leadership and Corporate Ethics. The hall held more than 2,000 people, yet when Jordan stepped onto the stage, the air fell into an uncanny silence. He didn't read from the prepared speech. He simply held the microphone, looked around, and spoke in a calm, warm voice. "I was once asked to leave a seat I had paid for, not because of a system error, but because of a look. But in that moment, I understood true strength isn't about where we are allowed to sit, but about choosing not to stand when someone tells us we don't deserve to be there." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience, where Richard Coleman, Lauren Park, and countless other leaders sat in stillness. We live in a world where technology can change everything except humanity. If we don't teach each other respect, then every invention is meaningless. I don't want your applause. I want you to ask yourselves one question. When power is in your hands, will you use it to lift someone up or to push them down? The hall erupted in applause, but Jordan only smiled softly. He bowed his head and stepped down from the stage like a man who had already done his part. That afternoon, Jordan returned to San Diego Airport. He sat alone in the lounge with no luggage and no ticket. He just wanted to watch the planes take off, the same planes he had once stopped, now soaring stronger than ever. A young flight attendant recognized him approaching with eyes glistening. "Mr. Miles," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm a new employee at Constellation. They begin our training with your story. Because of you, I learned that service isn't just work, it's respect." Jordan looked at her, his tone gentle but firm. "And remember, this respect is never a policy. It's a choice." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. He watched her walk away, a strange feeling rising inside him, not pride, but peace. Outside the window, the sky burned red with sunset. A plane glided by its reflection, spreading across the glass, leaving behind a glowing trail like an invisible signature. Jordan whispered softly, "The sky doesn't belong to anyone anymore. It belongs to everyone." Then he stood, adjusted his collar, and walked down the corridor. The golden light of dusk fell over his shoulders, stretching his shadow into the crowd of travelers preparing for their next departures. Flights born from a single lesson named dignity. The night in San Diego draped a thin layer of light over the glass towers. Jordan Miles sat at his desk, the warm glow of a yellow lamp softening his face, calm yet deep. On the screen were hundreds of emails, thank you notes, invitations, words of gratitude from people he had never met. Lauren Park walked in, carrying one last folder. "This is the final report for the Wings of Equity Fund," she said. "We've awarded more than 300 scholarships to aviation students, especially those who once felt excluded." Jordan nodded, smiling. "Good. That's the kind of flight I always wanted to see." Lauren took a seat across from him, her voice slowing. "You know, sometimes I wonder if that day you had stood up, things might have been easier for you, but the world would have been a much darker place." Jordan was silent. His eyes drifted toward the window, where a plane was taking off its trail, slicing across the night sky. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the cost of not standing is loneliness. But the cost of bowing is losing yourself." Lauren smiled softly, saying nothing. They sat in silence together, listening to the faint sound of waves in the distance and the hum of engines rising from the airport. Suddenly, Jordan's phone buzzed. A notification appeared on the screen. "FAA confirms the Code of Ethics and Equality in Aviation has been officially approved." He looked at the words for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "At last," he said, "the sky has learned how to be ashamed." Lauren laughed through her tears. "And it's learned how to be grateful too." Jordan closed his laptop gently and stood. "Tomorrow I'll fly again, not to live, but to remind myself that freedom isn't a privilege. It's a right for everyone." He stepped onto the balcony. The ocean breeze brushed past, carrying the salt and warmth of a city that had changed. In the distance, the airport lights blinked like man-made stars. He lifted his gaze, whispering as if speaking to the sky itself. "Fly high, but never forget to bow before human dignity." A plane ascended, cutting through the clouds, leaving behind a glowing trail, like a promise written across the heavens. Jordan Miles watched it rise, eyes glimmering, and smiled not a smile of victory, but of beginning. Because from that night on, the sky was no longer a place where people fought to sit higher, but a place where everyone could be seen and respected just the same. From the perspective of an expert in ethics and leadership culture, the journey of Jordan Miles is not merely the story of a first-class seat, but a mirror reflecting how the world operates between power and dignity. He never needed to shout to prove his worth. He only had to stay silent long enough for the truth to speak for itself. Because in the end, justice is not about punishment, but about the moment when people recognize what is right and choose to change on their own. In an era where prejudice can disguise itself as procedure, Jordan reminds us that respect does not require laws, only hearts wide enough to see one another. If you believe this world needs more people who have the courage to stand still for what is right, then, like this video, to spread that message and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories where dignity comes first. And before you leave, share your belief in one short but powerful phrase. Hold your dignity.